At 9:47 on a rain-soaked Thursday night, billionaire property developer Adrian Cross placed a check for $500,000 on the counter of a dying little bookstore and told its owner he wanted one evening of her time. Clara Bennett stared at the check without touching it. Outside, rain hammered the windows of Bellwether Books, a narrow century-old shop squeezed between two gleaming towers in downtown Chicago. Inside, the air smelled of dust, coffee, and aging paper. Clara was 31, exhausted, and 3 months behind on the building's mortgage. The bookstore had belonged to her father, and before him, her grandfather. It was the last piece of her family she had left. Adrian Cross, on the other hand, owned half the construction cranes visible from the bookstore's front window. At 42, he had transformed Cross Development into one of the most aggressive real estate companies in the Midwest. Newspapers called him brilliant. His competitors called him ruthless. Clara simply called him the man trying to destroy her neighborhood. Adrian stood across the counter in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly revenue. $500,000, he repeated calmly. You attend one dinner with me tomorrow evening. For hours. No tricks. No obligations afterward. Clara finally looked up. Do billionaires usually buy women by the hour, or is tonight special? Something flickered across his face, but he did not lose his composure. I am buying your presence, Miss Bennett. Nothing else. That sounds much prettier. She pushed the check back toward him. Still no. Adrian did not move. He had expected anger. He had expected bargaining. He had not expected refusal. Everyone had a price. That belief had helped build his empire. Your bank begins foreclosure proceedings Monday, he said. Clara's expression changed for half a second. Adrian noticed. Your business owes $87,000. The roof requires repairs. Your property taxes are overdue. $500,000 solves every problem you have. Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. You researched me. I research every important negotiation. And what exactly makes me important? Adrian glanced around the bookstore. Tomorrow night, the Hawthorne Foundation is holding its annual gala. My investors will be there. City officials will be there. I need someone beside me who looks like she cannot be bought. Clara gave a humorless laugh. So you decided to buy her? For the first time, Adrian almost smiled. The irony is not lost on me. She picked up the check, and Adrian's eyes narrowed with quiet satisfaction. Then Clara tore it cleanly in half. She tore it again, dropped the pieces onto the counter and said, You can leave now. Adrian stared at the pieces. Nobody had done that to him in years. He turned toward the door, but Clara's voice stopped him. Mr. Cross. He looked back. Before you demolish another block of this neighborhood, you should read the contracts your father signed. Adrian went completely still. His father had been dead for 11 years. What did you say? Clara reached beneath the counter and touched an old leather notebook hidden beside the register. I said you should read the contracts. What contracts? She met his eyes. The ones proving Cross Development never owned this neighborhood in the first place. Adrian did not leave. For several seconds he simply stood beneath the dim bookstore lights while rain streamed down the glass behind him. Clara could see the calculation beginning behind his eyes. He was no longer looking at her as a struggling shopkeeper. He was looking at her as a threat. Explain, he said. Clara folded her arms. Interesting. 5 minutes ago you knew my debts down to the dollar. Now suddenly you want information from the poor bookstore owner. I never called you poor. You did not need to. Adrian returned to the counter. What contracts were you talking about? Clara hesitated. Her father had warned her never to trust powerful men when they were frightened. According to him, frightened powerful men were more dangerous than angry ones. She reached beneath the counter but did not remove the leather notebook. My grandfather, Samuel Bennett, was an attorney before he opened this bookstore. In the 1980s, he represented 12 families and 6 local businesses on this block. Your father wanted their properties. Adrian's jaw tightened. My father bought them legally. That is what your company's records say. And you have evidence otherwise? Maybe. Adrian studied her. Then why have you done nothing with it? Clara looked toward the shelves her father had built by hand. Because evidence is not the same thing as power. That answer unsettled him more than an accusation would have. Adrian had spent his entire adult life understanding power. He knew exactly what she meant. A document could tell the truth and still disappear beneath expensive attorneys, sealed settlements, and years of litigation. "What do you want?" he asked. "Nothing from you. Everyone wants something." "That may be the saddest thing you have said tonight." Adrian ignored the insult. If those documents are legitimate, they could affect projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now you understand why I have not posted them online. His eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No. If I were threatening you, you would know." For a moment neither spoke. Then Adrian surprised her. "Come tomorrow night." Clara laughed. "We already finished this conversation." "Not for money." "Then why?" "The Hawthorne Gala will put you in the same room as two people who worked with my father during those acquisitions. Victor Hale, his former attorney, and Margaret Sloan, former chairwoman of the Municipal Redevelopment Board." Clara's expression changed. She knew both names from her grandfather's notes. Adrian saw it immediately. "You recognize them." She said nothing. "You want answers," he continued. "So do I." Clara looked at the torn checks scattered across the counter. "And suddenly we are partners?" "No, Adrian leaned closer. Partners trust each other. At least we agree on something." He removed a business card and placed it on the counter. "A car arrives tomorrow at 7. I did not say yes. You will." That confidence must be exhausting. Adrian walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned. "If what you have is real, Miss Bennett, someone besides me may already know you have it." The bell above the door rang as he disappeared into the rain. Clara waited until his car vanished before locking the deadbolt. Then she pulled out the leather notebook. A folded document slipped from its pages. Across the top was her grandfather's handwriting. "Cross Development, Original Land Agreement." Clara unfolded it and stared at the signature at the bottom. She had examined it dozens of times, but tonight one detail suddenly felt different. Beside Richard Cross's signature was another name. Victor Hale. Then the telephone rang. Clara froze. The bookstore had been closed for almost an hour. She answered slowly. No one spoke. She heard only breathing. Then a man's voice whispered, "Do not go to that gala." At 7 the following evening, a black sedan stopped outside Bellwether Books, and Clara Bennett did something she had promised herself she would never do. She stepped into Adrian Cross's world. She wore a simple midnight blue dress borrowed from her best friend and carried no expensive jewelry. Only her grandmother's silver pendant. Adrian was waiting inside the car. For several seconds he said nothing. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong?" "No," then stopped staring. Adrian looked toward the window. "You look different." That almost sounded human. "Do not get used to it." The Hawthorne Gala occupied the top floor of one of Chicago's most exclusive hotels. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble while politicians, investors, executives, and philanthropists moved through the room with champagne glasses and carefully rehearsed smiles. Clara immediately understood why Adrian had wanted someone beside him. Everyone was performing. Adrian's hand hovered near her back as they entered, never quite touching. Cameras flashed. "Smile," he murmured. "I thought you wanted someone who could not be bought. Even principled people have teeth." Clara smiled sweetly for the photographers. Better. Terrifying. They moved through the ballroom, and Clara quickly realized Adrian was watching the room more carefully than she was. He noticed every glance, every whispered conversation, every person who suddenly looked away. Then she saw Victor Hale. He was nearly 70, silver-haired, immaculate, and standing beside a window with a glass of bourbon. Clara's stomach tightened. Adrian noticed. "That is him." "I know." "How?" "My grandfather kept photographs." Before Adrian could answer, Victor looked across the room and saw Clara. The color drained from his face. It lasted only a moment, but Adrian caught it. "He recognizes you," Adrian said. "He never met me." "Then he recognizes someone you resemble." Clara touched her grandmother's pendant unconsciously. Adrian led her toward Victor. "Victor." The older man forced a smile. "Adrian. I was wondering when you would arrive. His eyes moved to Clara. And your guest? Clara Bennett. Victor's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Bennett. Clara smiled politely. My grandfather was Samuel Bennett. Silence. Tiny, almost invisible but unmistakable. Victor recovered quickly. Of course. The bookstore. You remember it? Clara asked. Your grandfather was difficult to forget. He wrote the same thing about you. Adrian nearly smiled. Victor did not. What exactly did Samuel write? Before Clara could answer, a woman approached them. Margaret Sloane was 82 but carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to rooms becoming quiet when she entered. She stared at Clara's necklace. Where did you get that pendant? It belonged to my grandmother. Margaret's face changed. Eleanor Bennett? Clara nodded. Margaret grabbed her wrist. Come with me. Adrian immediately stepped forward. Margaret. Not you. Her voice was sharp. She looked directly at Clara. Only her. 10 minutes later, Clara stood with Margaret inside a private library away from the ballroom. The older woman closed the door. Your grandfather did not lose those properties because Richard Cross cheated him, Margaret said. Clara's heart pounded. Then what happened? Margaret looked toward the door as though afraid someone might be listening. Samuel discovered something much larger. The land acquisitions were never about buildings. What were they about? Margaret leaned closer. Money laundering. Clara stared at her. Whose money? Margaret's answer came in a whisper. Victor Hale's. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the library. Clara heard Margaret gasp. Then the sound of something striking the floor. Margaret! Clara reached forward blindly. Somewhere outside, guests shouted as the ballroom lights failed too. A hand suddenly closed around Clara's arm. She twisted away, but a familiar voice said, It is me, Adrian. Emergency lights flickered on seconds later, bathing the room in dull red. Margaret was standing beside the desk, shaken but unharmed. Adrian looked between them. What happened? Power failure, Margaret said too quickly. Clara knew she was lying. Adrian knew it too. He shut the door. What did you tell her? Margaret's eyes hardened. Things your father should have told you. My father is dead. Which makes the truth more difficult, not less important. Adrian's expression became cold. Enough riddles. Clara stepped between them. She said Victor used the redevelopment acquisitions to launder money. Adrian looked at Margaret. Is that true? Margaret sat slowly. For the first time she looked old. Your father discovered it after several transactions had already closed. Victor controlled shell companies purchasing properties through intermediaries. Richard realized cross-development was being used as legitimate cover. Adrian shook his head. My father would have gone to the authorities. He tried. Margaret looked toward Clara. Samuel Bennett helped him. Clara felt the room tilt beneath her. All her life, she had believed Richard Cross had been her grandfather's enemy. They worked together? Secretly. Samuel collected original deeds, financial records, and correspondence. Richard gathered internal company documents. They intended to expose Victor. Adrian's voice lowered. What happened? Margaret looked at him with something close to pity. Your father's car accident happened 3 days before they were supposed to meet federal investigators. Adrian became motionless. His father had died on an icy highway 11 years earlier. Every report had called it an accident. Clara watched the certainty disappear from his face. Suddenly he was not the billionaire developer newspapers photographed. He was a son discovering that the foundation of his life might be a lie. And Samuel? Clara asked. He became frightened. He hid the evidence and withdrew from everything. Victor believed most of the documents had been destroyed. Most? Adrian asked. Margaret looked at Clara. Samuel kept one complete copy. Clara thought of the leather notebook beneath her bookstore counter. Where? Margaret did not answer. She did not need to. Adrian turned toward Clara. The bookstore. Clara's blood went cold. The anonymous telephone call suddenly made sense. She grabbed her purse. I need to go. We need to go, Adrian corrected. They left the gala without saying goodbye. During the drive, Clara stared at the city lights flashing past the windows. If Victor knows, she said. Why wait until now? Adrian's face was grim. Because until yesterday, nobody knew you understood what you had. You did. And someone may have been watching me. When the sedan turned onto Clara's street, both of them saw the flashing lights. Clara stopped breathing. Fire engines surrounded Bellwether Books. Smoke poured from a shattered upstairs window. She opened the car door before it stopped moving. Clara. Adrian caught her arm. My grandfather's records are inside. The building is burning. Everything my family has left is inside. She tried to pull away, but Adrian held her firmly. Documents can be replaced. You cannot. Clara looked at him, stunned by the fear in his voice. Behind them, firefighters rushed through the entrance. Then one emerged carrying a scorched metal box. Clara recognized it immediately. Her father's old archive box. A firefighter placed it on the sidewalk. The lock had broken open. Inside were dozens of papers, photographs, and ledgers. But the leather notebook was gone. By sunrise, Bellwether Books smelled of smoke and soaked plaster. The fire department had contained the damage to the rear office and upper storage room, but water had flooded half the shop. Clara stood among ruined boxes while Adrian spoke quietly with an investigator near the entrance. She hated how natural he looked taking control. He made telephone calls, summoned contractors, arranged temporary storage, and somehow found a company willing to board the broken windows before breakfast. Clara finally approached him. Stop. Adrian ended his call. Stop what? Fixing everything. Your roof is damaged. It was my roof yesterday too. Yesterday someone had not tried to burn your building down. And yesterday you were offering me $500,000 to attend dinner. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. That feels like a different lifetime. Clara almost agreed. Almost. I cannot owe you. Then do not. Contractors are not free. Considerate payment for information. That sounds exactly like owing you. Adrian sighed. You make accepting help unnecessarily difficult. And you make giving help look suspiciously like purchasing control. That silenced him. Clara walked toward the scorched archive box. Most of the documents were copies of old tax records and correspondence, but one envelope had survived. Inside was a photograph dated 19 years earlier. Samuel Bennett stood beside Richard Cross outside Bellwether Books. They were smiling and shaking hands. On the back, Samuel had written, Richard kept his promise. Trust the son only if he becomes better than the father. Clara read the sentence twice. Adrian approached. What is it? She handed him the photograph. He stared at his father. His expression softened in a way Clara had never seen. I have never seen this. Neither have I. He turned it over. When he read the message, his jaw tightened. Apparently your grandfather had high expectations. Do not look so worried. You have not passed the test yet. Adrian gave a quiet laugh, but the moment disappeared when his phone rang. His security chief had discovered something important. The bookstore's exterior camera had recorded a vehicle behind the building shortly before the fire. It belonged to a private security company contracted by Hale Strategic Holdings. Victor Hale's company. Adrian immediately called his attorney. Clara stopped him. What are you doing? Taking this to the police. With what? A vehicle near an alley. It is enough to investigate. And when Victor realizes we have surviving documents? Adrian understood. He destroys whatever remains. Clara nodded. We need the original notebook. You said it disappeared. I said the leather notebook disappeared. She walked toward the children's section, moved a wooden chair, and removed 3 books from a low shelf. Behind them was a small wall safe. Adrian stared. Clara opened it and removed a sealed plastic folder. My grandfather was paranoid, she said. Apparently I inherited it. Inside was a handwritten index listing dates, transaction numbers, and coded locations. Adrian studied it. These are not evidence. No, Clara pointed to the final line. Storage 314 Union Central Station. Adrian looked at her. A locker. Maybe. Union Central Station was renovated 15 years ago. Then we had better hope nobody emptied the old storage vault. Clara started toward the door. Adrian caught up. You are not going alone. I did not invite you. Your grandfather's note said to trust the son. Clara glanced at him. Only if he becomes better than the father. Adrian opened the door for her. Then I suppose I have work to do. Union Central Station had not served passengers in more than a decade. Its restored upper floors had become offices and luxury apartments. But beneath the building, several original storage corridors remained sealed behind maintenance doors. Adrian's company connections got them inside within an hour. Clara disliked that fact almost as much as she found it useful. They followed an elderly building manager through a concrete hallway lined with rusted metal doors. Most lockers were cleared during renovation, he explained. But legal disputes prevented us from opening several privately leased units. Including 314? Clara asked. The manager checked his records. That one is unusual. Paid in advance under a perpetual storage agreement. Adrian looked at Clara. Your grandfather planned ahead. Locker 314 was actually a narrow storage room. Clara's key, hidden inside the spine of an old dictionary at Bellwether Books, opened it. The door groaned inward. Inside stood a desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a cardboard box covered in dust. Clara stepped forward slowly. Adrian remained behind her. On the desk was an envelope addressed in Samuel Bennett's handwriting. For Clara. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was short. Samuel explained that he had hidden the records because exposing Victor while Clara was young would have endangered the entire family. Richard Cross had intended to testify but died before he could. Samuel believed Victor had arranged the crash but could never prove it. The files in the room contained financial records showing illegal transfers through shell corporations, forged property acquisitions, and payments to public officials. Clara lowered the letter. He carried this alone for 20 years. Adrian opened one filing cabinet. His face changed as he read the first document. These transfers came through Cross Development. Does that make your company responsible? Legally? Possibly. Morally? He paused. Yes. Clara had expected denial. Instead, Adrian looked sick. You did not do this. I inherited the benefits. That is not the same thing. Tell that to the families who lost their homes. His words surprised her. The Adrian Cross who had walked into her bookstore with a $500,000 check would never have said them. Clara moved beside him. What happens now? We turn everything over to federal investigators. And your company? May lose projects. Investors. Possibly hundreds of millions. You are willing to do that? Adrian looked at her. Ask me tomorrow. Maybe I will be terrified enough to give you a different answer. Clara smiled faintly. At least that was honest. They spent 2 hours photographing every document. Somewhere between old ledgers and yellowed contracts, the hostility between them began to dissolve. Clara saw a man confronting the sins that had financed his privilege. Adrian saw a woman who had every reason to hate him but still distinguished inheritance from guilt. When they finally prepared to leave, Adrian stopped beside the door. About the $500,000. Clara groaned. Please do not ruin your progress. I was going to apologize. She turned. For the money? For believing money gave me the right to define the terms of every human interaction. Clara studied him. That sounded painfully self-aware. I hated every second of it. She laughed. Adrian smiled. Then the building manager's voice echoed from the hallway. Mr. Cross. Adrian opened the door. The corridor was empty. Clara frowned. Where is he? A second later, the lights went dark. Adrian's phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. Leave the files and walk away. Clara looked at him. Victor. Adrian read the second message. This one contained a photograph taken only minutes earlier. It showed Clara entering the station. Beneath it were 6 words. Next time she will not walk out. Adrian's first instinct was to protect Clara by controlling everything around her. He wanted security at her bookstore, guards outside her apartment, private transportation, and a hotel suite under another name. Clara rejected almost all of it. You cannot turn my life into a prison because Victor sent a threat. He burned your bookstore. Allegedly. You are choosing a strange moment to become legally precise. And you are choosing a predictable moment to become unbearable. They argued for 20 minutes before reaching a compromise. Clara would stay with her best friend outside the city, while federal investigators reviewed copies of the evidence. Adrian would keep the originals secured through his attorney, but the largest decision belonged entirely to him. The following morning, Adrian called an emergency meeting of Cross Development's board. Clara did not attend, but she watched the consequences unfold on television. Adrian stood before reporters outside company headquarters and announced an independent investigation into historic property acquisitions conducted under his father's administration. He confirmed that records had been provided to federal authorities and pledged restitution if families or businesses had been unlawfully deprived of property. Cross Development's stock fell within hours. 2 investors resigned from major projects. Commentators called Adrian reckless. His board threatened to remove him. Victor Hale appeared on television that afternoon and called the allegations a desperate fabrication built from stolen and manipulated records. Then he attacked Clara by name, describing her as a financially troubled bookstore owner seeking a settlement from a wealthy corporation. Clara watched from her friend's living room, furious. Adrian called seconds later. Do not respond publicly. He called me a liar. That is what he wants. Let the evidence speak. Easy for the billionaire to say. Silence followed. Clara regretted the words immediately. Adrian finally said, "You are right. Adrian, you have more at risk personally than I do. I should not pretend otherwise." That evening, he arrived at her friend's house without an entourage. He looked exhausted. "The board voted," he said. "I have been temporarily removed as chief executive." Clara stared at him. "Because you released the records? Because I refused to stop cooperating with investigators. You built that company. My father built it. I expanded it." He gave a tired smile. "Maybe I confused those things for too long." Clara felt something shift inside her. When she had first met him, Adrian's identity seemed inseparable from his wealth. Now he had willingly risked the thing that gave him power because keeping it would require silence. "What will you do?" she asked. "For the first time in 20 years, I genuinely do not know." Clara poured him coffee. They sat at the kitchen table until midnight, talking not about Victor or evidence but about ordinary things. Adrian told her about growing up with a father who was constantly absent and a mother who believed vulnerability was weakness. Clara told him how her father used to hide handwritten recommendations inside books for customers. At one point their hands touched on the table. Neither moved away. Adrian looked at her. "That first night, I thought $500,000 was an extraordinary offer. It was extraordinarily insulting." "I know." "Good." His smile faded. "Clara, when this is over, I would like to take you to dinner." "How much are you offering?" Adrian laughed, genuinely this time. "I walked into that." Clara smiled. "Yes, you did." Before either could say more, her phone rang. It was Margaret Sloan. Her voice was trembling. "Clara, I found the missing document. The one Samuel could never find." "What document?" "Proof Richard Cross knew Victor planned to kill him." A crash sounded through the telephone. Then the line went dead. Margaret Sloan was found alive but unconscious in her home 20 minutes later. Police discovered no intruder, but her study had been searched and a wall safe stood open. Adrian and Clara arrived at the hospital shortly after midnight. Federal investigators were already there. Margaret regained consciousness near dawn and asked to see Clara alone. Her voice was weak. "He took the envelope." "Victor." Margaret nodded. "But he does not know Samuel made a copy." She reached beneath her hospital blanket and removed a tiny brass key hanging from a chain. "Bank deposit box. Samuel gave me this after Richard died." Clara stared at it. "Why did you wait?" Tears filled Margaret's eyes. "Because I was a coward." Clara closed her fingers around the key. "You are helping now." 2 federal agents accompanied Clara and Adrian to the bank later that morning. Inside the deposit box was a cassette tape, several photographs, and a sealed letter written by Richard Cross. The tape had been recorded during a private meeting between Richard and Victor 11 years earlier. Victor's voice was unmistakable. He demanded that Richard destroy Samuel Bennett's evidence and warned that refusing would have consequences. Richard refused. Victor then mentioned Richard's regular route to his lake house and said accidents happened easily on winter roads. It was not a confession, but combined with financial transfers, phone records, and other evidence, investigators believed it was enough to reopen the circumstances surrounding Richard's death. Yet the sealed letter contained something even more important to Adrian. Richard admitted that he had originally approved several questionable acquisitions before discovering Victor's criminal network. He had benefited from corruption before attempting to stop it. He asked Adrian if he ever learned the truth, not to protect the Cross name at the expense of innocent people. Adrian read the letter twice without speaking. Clara stood beside him. "Your father was not innocent," she said gently. "No." But he tried to correct what he had done. Too late for some people. "Yes." Adrian folded the letter carefully. Clara appreciated that he did not search for excuses. By evening, investigators executed warrants on several Hale properties. Victor attempted to leave the country aboard a private aircraft, but was detained before departure for questioning related to financial crimes, obstruction, and evidence tampering. The investigation into Richard's death continued. News cameras surrounded Cross Development headquarters, Bellwether Books, and even the hospital. Everyone wanted the sensational version of the story. Billionaire corruption, secret recordings, burned bookstores, hidden fortunes. But the truth Clara cared about was quieter. Her grandfather had spent decades protecting evidence because he believed one day someone would be brave enough to use it. Adrian had finally chosen truth over inheritance. 3 weeks later, the Cross Development Board offered Adrian his position back after several major investors publicly supported the investigation and restitution plan. He accepted under one condition. An independent trust would compensate verified victims of fraudulent property transactions, even if doing so cost the company hundreds of millions. His first visit afterward was not to corporate headquarters. It was to Bellwether Books. The front window had been repaired. New shelves were being installed. Clara was standing on a ladder when he entered. "You know," she said, "most billionaires send flowers. I considered it. What happened? You would accuse me of trying to purchase affection. You are learning." Adrian looked around the bookstore. "I came to ask you something." Clara climbed down. "How much?" "No money. Progress." He took a breath. "Dinner. One evening. Just you and me." Clara pretended to consider it. "That sounds suspiciously familiar. The terms have improved." "What are they?" Adrian smiled. "You choose the restaurant. And this time you are completely free to say no." Clara looked at him for several seconds. Then yes. 6 months after Adrian Cross offered Clara Bennett $500,000 for one evening, he stood outside Bellwether Books holding 2 cups of coffee that cost less than $10 combined. Clara opened the door and looked at him suspiciously. "Is one of those a bribe?" "Absolutely." He handed her the larger cup. "I have become financially conservative." She laughed and let him inside. Bellwether Books had changed. The damaged rooms were restored, but Clara had refused Adrian's offer to pay for improvements. Instead, the bookstore had received thousands of online orders after the story became national news. Customers arrived from across the city, many simply wanting to support the woman who had helped expose one of Chicago's largest historic property scandals. The federal case against Victor Hale was still unfolding, and prosecutors had charged him with multiple financial offenses and obstruction-related crimes. The investigation into Richard Cross's death remained open, but evidence recovered from Hale's records had strengthened suspicions that the crash had not been accidental. Cross Development had changed too. Adrian sold several luxury projects and redirected capital into mixed-income housing developments. The restitution trust had already returned money or property rights to dozens of families. Critics accused him of repairing his reputation. Adrian never argued with them. He simply continued. Clara respected that more than any speech he could have made. Their relationship developed slowly. There were dinners, arguments, long walks, and mornings when Adrian helped open boxes of books before heading to meetings. He was still controlling sometimes. Clara still reminded him when he became impossible. He still believed every problem required a strategy. She still believed some problems required patience. Somehow they worked. One evening, Adrian arrived after closing carrying a small wooden box. Clara immediately frowned. If there is expensive jewelry in there, take it back. Your faith in me is inspiring. He placed the box on the counter. Inside was not jewelry. It was a restored fountain pen engraved with the initials SB. Clara stopped breathing. My grandfather's pen. Investigators recovered it among documents seized from one of Victor's storage facilities. They released it yesterday. Clara lifted it carefully. Tears filled her eyes. Adrian said nothing. He had learned that not every silence needed to be filled. Thank you, she whispered. I did not buy it, he said. Clara laughed through her tears. Definitely progress. They walked outside after closing. Chicago glowed around them, towers rising above old brick buildings, wealth and history occupying the same streets. When they reached the corner, Clara stopped. Do you remember the first thing you said to me? Adrian grimaced. Unfortunately. $500,000. Please never tell that story at parties. I intend to tell it at every party for the rest of your life. He looked at her. That sounds like a very long commitment. Clara smiled. Maybe. Adrian reached for her hand but waited until she placed hers in his. That small hesitation meant more to her than the fortune he had once placed on her counter. You know what was funny? Clara said. What? That night you thought the secret was whatever I knew about your company. Was it not? She shook her head. The documents mattered. But my grandfather taught me something more important. What? Clara looked up at the man who had once believed everything could be negotiated if the number was high enough. He taught me that the moment someone uses money to determine your worth, you learn far more about their value than your own. Adrian absorbed the words quietly. Your grandfather would have hated the man who walked into your bookstore that night. Probably. And what would he think of me now? Clara leaned closer. He would say the jury is still out. Adrian laughed. They continued down the sidewalk hand in hand. The $500,000 check had disappeared long ago, torn into pieces on a bookstore counter. In the end, Adrian never purchased Clara's evening. He earned another one, and then another, through choices no fortune could make for him. Clara had possessed the evidence that could threaten his empire, but the most important thing she knew was something Adrian had spent his entire life failing to understand. Wealth could purchase buildings, companies, influence, and almost any seat at any table. But respect had no price, trust had no shortcut, and love offered under free choice was worth infinitely more than anything money could ever buy.